and welcome to another episode of All About Dat Base. And today we're going to be looking at creating a wintry meadow type base. Now, some people might watch this video and think that the technique for making this is a little bit faffy and intricate for the kind of result that you get. And I can understand that because there's a lot of little steps and I wanted to get some nice extra little touches in there. But if you haven't got the time to do this base as I've kind of shown, you can always skip the crackle paint step and just have the snow and the grass, and that will be a much quicker result for you. Also in this tutorial I have used some techniques from my previous videos, but what I'll do is I'll make sure I put the links to those videos as pop-ups in this one, so if you want to jump back and have a look at how I do those things, then it'll be nice and easy for you. So let's head to the table and I will see you in a bit. Now, I've already done the first step of this base, which is to prepare it for crackle paint. Now, there'll be a link popping up in this video to take you to my crackle paint tutorial video if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But briefly, what I've done is I've primed this wooden base in white. Then I've added a layer of Vallejo Ghost Grey, and then I've added a layer of PVA glue. Now, the next step we're going to take is to add little bits of crackle paint for our little icy puddles. So, if you know roughly how you want this base to look, you can start just taking little bit of crackle paint on your brush and just applying it in a few random blobs, just smoothing them out. So let's have one there and one there, and then let's put some here. Now, you can be quite thin in your application here. You don't want these puddles to form really big cracks. And as I said in my crackle paint video, the thicker you apply the crackle paint, the bigger the cracks will be. So for this, we just want some little puddles with really small cracks. So I'm just applying quite thin little layers, and then I'm just smudging them out a little bit to make little random puddle shapes. And you can go around the edges and just flatten it down a little bit like this. And then once you're happy with your puddles, you just need to leave that to dry for about 24 hours. And then we'll come back and start building up the terrain. So the crackle paint's dried and it's left us with some nice little cracked patches on the base. So the next thing we're going to do is build up the ground around it, because what we're aiming for is just a completely white snowy surface with these little puddles of ice in. So for this, we're going to go back to my old favourite, the Vallejo Rough White Pumice. And because I want to be relatively careful with this, I'm going to apply it with an old paintbrush rather than the texture tool. So I'm just going to load up my brush and start plopping it on and moving it around to form kind of a rough, hilly area of ground around these puddles. You can overlap onto the puddles ever so slightly if you want to, just to make it look a little bit more natural. And just make sure you go right up to the edges of the base. So I'm going to have this bit a little bit flatter, I think. So at this point, I'm literally just kind of painting this on as if it's just a normal paint. Let's have another lumpy bit there. And just get rid of any of the kind of spiky bits that you don't want. And there we go. So all that needs is for that to be left to dry. Now I usually try and leave this for about 12 hours so that it sets all the way through, especially when I've got a big kind of mound of it somewhere. So I'll be back shortly and we'll go to the next steps. Now this next step is optional. So what I'm going to do here is paint the ground, the earth, if you like. And the reason I'm doing that is so that if there are any gaps in the snow or any of it doesn't quite stick, any of this ground showing through will be an earthy colour that way. And it just adds again that little bit of realism to it. So I'm going to do this with Steel Legion Drab. So I'm just going to put some on my palette. I'm going to take a relatively big brush. I think this is a size 5. And we're just going to gently and carefully apply this to everywhere that we put the texture paint, making sure that we don't get any on the actual ice, on your puddles. So, but as I say, this is completely optional. I like to do it just because I can be a bit of a perfectionist and I want to make sure that if there's a little bit of a gap in the snow that it looks like there's real earth underneath. But you can feel free to skip this and go straight to the next step if you want. So I'll finish painting this and then we'll come right back. The next step is just to do a quick dry brush on this brown earth, and for that we're going to use Citadel's Zandri Dust. And again, obviously, if you decided not to bother with the painting here, you can obviously skip this step as well. So I'm just going to get a tiny bit on my brush, wipe it off, and then just flick this over to bring out some of the raised areas. At this point with this colour, if you are doing this, it doesn't matter too much if you smudge some onto your ice puddles like I've done here, and you will see why shortly. So with that done, we're going to bring out some Drakenhof Nightshade. Now, if you watched my ice base video, you'll know that this is the colour that I use just to give my cracked ice a little bit of that cold bluish tinge. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm just going to take a small brush and get a little bit on. You don't want to be too heavy with this, and all I'm doing is just brushing this very lightly onto the areas where we've got crackle paint, just enough to give it a slight tint. Try and get it to go down into the cracks. Okay, and now we'll leave that to dry for a couple of minutes and be right back. And next, we're going to apply a nice liberal coat of Agrax Earthshade Gloss over the entire base. Now, even if you haven't painted this brown, I would still recommend doing this just to give a little bit of a changing colour underneath the snow, so that at least something shows through any of the places where the snow might not be as thick and things like that. And we're using the gloss to try and make sure that we get that nice shiny effect on top of the ice puddles. And we'll get some more. And you can see now that what this does, this combination of these two shades, it still got that slightly cold bluey tinge, but it also now has the kind of dirty look to it like you'd get with an ice puddle in a muddy field. So I find that the combination of the two works quite well. And just make sure we've got everywhere covered. And there we go. So leave that to dry for maybe an hour or so, just to make sure. And then when we come back, we're going to start adding our tufts and snow. So the earth and the ice are all done now. So we're going to move on to filling this out with grass and snow. So the first thing we're going to do is apply some tufts. Now, you can do pretty much whatever you want here with tufts. You can add some coloured flowers, you can add some bright green grass. But for me personally, I want this to look like a very wintry scene. So I'm going for these from the Army Painter. These are, I think they're called either dead grass or winter grass. I can't remember, I don't have the box. So these are just, you know, brown and kind of dead looking. So I'm going to attach a couple of these to the base. So let's put something in between there. And the great thing about these Army Painter ones is that you get the same design in several different sizes, which I find really handy. So we can put a smaller one here. And then one of these teeny tiny ones can squeeze in there next to that one. And then let's put another one of these smaller ones on this side here. That'll do, I think. So I always just kind of fluff them out a little bit once they've stuck them on. And like I say, you can do whatever you want with this bit. It's completely up to you. So next what we're going to do is apply the snow. Now, if you want to know how to make this snow, I'll put a link in this video so that you can just pop and see it. But essentially, this is PVA glue and talc that I've just mixed together. So I'm going to take my applicator and just start splodging this on and spreading it out in a relatively thick coat. And obviously it doesn't matter if you get it on the shrubs. And I'm going right up to the edges of my little ice puddles. It's not the easiest job in the world, this, but it is effective. So we just keep turning it round and pushing this in. This is the only thing in the hobby where I can say this actually smells really nice. Because I use baby talc for it, which just has that lovely, delicate smell to it. So, push that down there. It doesn't matter too much if you get it on the ice either. Because obviously that would happen in the real world. So just squeeze a bit in between the shrubs. So you can see now what I meant earlier on in the video, that there will be bits of the base visible beneath the snow. And that's why I prefer to paint it, just because it gives that colour shining through. Okay, so once you've applied the majority of your snow, you're going to take your trusty toothpick. If I ever have t-shirts designed, I'm going to have one that says, "Don't forget your toothpick." Okay, so we want just a little bit on the toothpick, and we're just going to very, very lightly just kind of tickle the tips of these tufts. Oh, that's some great alliteration. Tickle the tips of your tufts. I think I need sleep. I'm rambling now. I do apologise. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that's it, nearly done. The last step is to apply some extra talc. And for that, I've just got some in my hand, and I'm just going to start sprinkling it over everything. You can sprinkle it over the ice patches, over the tufts, all of it. Just make sure you get a nice covering on all of the snow. It might look a little bit rubbish at the moment, but I promise you it was worth it. So I'm going to leave this to dry with all the excess on, and then when we come back I will show you the finished result. This is dried, so the first thing we need to do is our Taylor Swift bit and shake it off. So give it a good tap on all sides. Give it a little bit of a blow just to get rid of the excess, and there you go. So you've got your snow and your icy puddles and your frosty snowy grass. So all that's left to do is paint the rim and you're done. So something I wanted to show you as well is, a couple of weeks ago you might remember I did a basic mud base, and I wanted to see if I could experiment with making frosty mud. So I did this. It still needs a bit of work to perfect it, but I've done my normal mud base round here, and then I've done what I normally do with the gloss wash, but then I've dry brushed it with some of that Ghost Grey to give it that frosty look. And I've used this technique here and made my icy puddle in the mud, and I've painted it the same colour. So yeah, I think it kind of works, but like I say, I'm still working on that one. And just as an added extra for this one, if you wanted these icy bits to be a bit more glossy, you could always add a little bit of the still water. I'd probably recommend just using a brush and dabbing it on, but that's completely up to you and what kind of aesthetic you want. So there you go. That is how I make my snowy field bases. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel, and that way you'll be made aware whenever I release new content. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, and the links to those are down in the description below. And as always, if you've got any feedback or anything you want to ask me about this video, leave it in the comments down there and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Now, I will be back on Wednesday with another Back to Basics video where I will be showing you how to make a simple Nurgle swamp. And until then, happy hobbying!